wish there was a monitor that could tell us exactly when someone was in labor, because myth busting, that contraction monitor cannot tell us when someone is in labor. So let's have a conversation about cervical exams, what they are, what we're feeling for, when they're important, when they're not important, the fact that you can say no, and also the cervical exam that is going to be real tough to not do, not because you can't say no to it, but because they can make your life super annoying to not have this one cervical exam. But remembering that you do not have to consent to anything that you do not feel comfortable with, okay? So that's the basis of what we're talking about today. Consent that you can say no, okay? So the cervix is like the plug that holds your baby inside when it's not time to come out yet, okay? So it's like a hat that your baby wears, except picture me upside down, okay? I'm your baby upside down, and this is my cervical hat. This is my plug that's holding me inside. If you look real close, you see that dimple in the middle. That dimple will eventually be a hole, and it will begin to open up and dilate. Jen, the nurse, gave me these cervixes, by the way. I love them so much. So eventually, as you go through labor, your cervix is going to open up and dilate, and that cervix is going to get thinner around the outside and eventually get pretty thin. That's your baby's head right there. Okay, so this is my little baby hat. That would be my little baby head right there. And remember, me upside down is baby. Okay, so your cervix is really like this. So when we go to check it, your cervix, we stick our fingers in, we're feeling for number one, how dilated are you? What is this, how big is this cervical hole? I'm also feeling for how soft your cervix is, because a hard cervix, like this one, is not a laboring cervix. And then how thin is your cervix? And then also, where is your baby's head in the pelvis? Now, we should only be doing cervical exams when it's going to change our plan of care, okay? So the more that we stick our grubby little fingers inside of people, the higher the risk of infection, okay? So if we're doing it for kicks and giggles, let's just check for fun. We're doing it every hour, 30 minutes, 2 hours. We're doing it just on a timed schedule. That is going to increase your risk of infection. It doesn't mean if you get a ton of cervical exams that you're going to have an infection. It just increases that risk, especially if your water is broken. It is possible to go through labor and have a baby with 0 cervical exams. That is possible. And I'm also going to talk to you about the times where a cervical exam might be really important. So when might a cervical exam be really important? Well, if you're coming in for an induction, it is impossible for me to start an induction on you until, number one, I'd make sure that your baby is head down, which I can do through a cervical exam. We can also do it through an ultrasound. It's just an extra cost. And there may not be somebody available right then to do an ultrasound on you. But I can tell most of the time if a baby is head down through a cervical exam. But I'm also feeling your cervix to see how dilated you are, how thin, because knowing that is going to help me be able to recommend the right kind of induction method for you. So if you're coming in and your cervix is thicker than a Snicker, we don't need to be starting Pitocin on you. No, ma'am. We need to do some cervical ripening first. So as you go through an induction, knowing how your cervix is changing will also help us to know what our best next step is. It is very difficult, ne'er I say impossible, to have an induction without a cervical exam. But other times that a cervical exam might be important. If your baby all of a sudden is having these deep decelerations, we need to know if that's because your baby's cord has come out before the head, because that would be an obstetrical emergency. If you're wanting your water broken, we got to get it up in there to do that. If there is a need at some point to place an internal monitor for some reason, that would also require a cervical exam, because that's how it goes in. But doing a cervical exam every hour or something is not evidence-based in the slightest. Now, the cervical exam that is the hardest to get out of, not because you can't say no to it, but because it could make things really annoying and difficult for you, is the admission cervical exam. Because the contraction monitor cannot tell us if someone is in labor. We have lots of people come in what's called prodromal labor, which is this labor that's like consistent contractions, like every 2 to 3 minutes or so. that are enough to be painful to you, but not strong enough to cause cervical change. So a lot of places have like a rule, like you can't be admitted before like 6 centimeters or 4 centimeters or something crazy like that. Where I work, it's not a number, it's change, right? So if your contractions are strong enough to cause cervical change, then that's when you get the green light to be admitted. So let's say we have 2 patients who come in to triage to be admitted onto labor and delivery. They both believe that they're in labor. We have them both having consistent painful contractions every 2 to 3 minutes apart. We have one patient who says no cervical exams at all, and then the other patient allows a cervical exam when they get there, and then a couple hours later to determine cervical change. The patient who got that cervical exam will get admitted way quicker than the other patient because they're still not sure if the other one's in labor or not. So if there's one bed, the one bed is going to go to the person who has had confirmed cervical change. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, okay? I'm just telling you the state of affairs, the state of the world, okay? So you may sit in triage for way longer if you don't have a cervical exam, because the contraction monitor does not tell us strength of contractions, only that you're having them, when they happen, and how long they last. Now we also take a look at you. We feel your belly. We feel those contractions. The trouble is, you can be having contractions that feel pretty strong but don't cause cervical change. And just the state of affairs, they don't want to give somebody a labor bed who is in prodromal labor, because you could be 4 centimeters for weeks. My friend Amanda, she was working at 6 centimeters dilated. It's not what your current state of your cervix is that tells us whether you're in labor or not, unless you're like completely dilated or something like that. It's knowing if your cervix is changing. Now, here's what I want you to hear from me, okay? No one can do anything to you without your consent. Period, point blank. They can't, okay? There can be some coercion, right? Like, hey, we're not going to admit you until you get a cervical exam, which can make your life really super annoying. But you could also get those cervical exams just to get admitted and be like, okay, no more, thank you. But the only way that we can know numerical strength of contractions is to place an internal monitor called an intrauterine pressure catheter. So unless that's done, that external monitor, we can see that you're having contractions, but the numbers mean 0, zilch, nothing. And Braxton Hicks contractions can show up on a monitor just like regular contractions. So if someone is wanting to do a cervical exam on you, and you need to know, is this a just for kicks and giggles cervical exam, or is this one where it's really going to change something? You can ask, how will this cervical exam change the plan of care? And they may say, hey, your baby's looking like they're in distress and we just need to check and make sure that everything's okay in there. Or they may say, hey, we're just curious. We just want to know. But you are the one who gets to decide whether or not that happens.